this family afford to buy you a new outfit? Or did you deliberately wear torn clothes to embarrass my family on my daughter's wedding day?
Mrs. Obiora's voice did not need to be loud. It only needed to be enough. Enough to make 3 nearby tables fall silent. Enough to make people holding wine glasses pause mid-motion. Enough to make Adeze, standing in her husband's family wedding, feel as though the entire room was closing in around her. The Obiora family wedding that day was as grand as everything they did. 4 rows of tables covered in white linens, fresh flowers filling every corner of the courtyard, a live band playing since morning, and guests dressed in elegant attire. Mrs. Obiora stood in the center of the courtyard, wearing a gold-embroidered outfit she had commissioned 3 months earlier, carrying the smile of a woman accustomed to being admired. Then she saw Adeze walk in, wearing an old ivory linen dress whose color had faded with time, its simple handmade stitching free of beads and floral embroidery. Mrs. Obiora set down her glass and walked straight toward her. Adeze stopped and greeted her mother-in-law in the same calm voice she always used, but Mrs. Obiora had no need to hear the greeting. She needed the entire room to hear what she was about to say.
My sister-in-law is dressed beautifully. Truly vintage.
Before turning to her friend, smiling just enough for those who wanted to notice. My sister-in-law is dressed so beautifully, truly vintage. Laughter erupted among the bride's friends. An aunt seated at a nearby table leaned toward the person beside her and whispered, though loudly enough to be heard, "The daughter-in-law of this family dresses like that?" Coming to someone's wedding, looking as if she's headed to the market. The other woman shook her head slightly and replied, "Well, she comes from a poor family. What can you expect?" At another table, a middle-aged woman clicked her tongue as she looked at Adeze before turning to her husband. "See that? Mrs. Obiora's daughter-in-law. What on earth is she wearing? It looks like some old hand-me-down." Her husband glanced over and answered casually, "Just leave her alone." But his wife did not leave her alone. She kept watching Adeze with the expression of someone who had just found a story to tell after the party. Emeka, Adeze's husband, stood 5 steps away. He heard everything. He looked at his wife once for less than 2 seconds, then lowered his head to his phone and said nothing. He did not walk over. He did not stand between her and the crowd. That lowering of his head was enough of an answer to explain exactly how their 8 years of marriage had unfolded. Adeze stood straight through all of it. The laughter, the whispers, the stares from every direction, her mother-in-law's words still hanging in the air. She did not cry. She did not argue. She did not even bother looking back at anyone. She simply placed her hand on the old seam running along her sleeve and gently brushed it once, slowly, steadily, as if touching something that only she knew was there. Then, she quietly stepped away to the back corner of the courtyard and stood alone beneath an old palm tree, gazing at the morning sky, her hand still resting lightly on the worn stitching. Inside, the wedding continued as though nothing had happened. The music still played, the laughter still rang out, and the story of Mrs. Obiora's daughter-in-law in her old dress began spreading from one table to another like a seasoning no one had asked for, yet somehow appeared at every feast. No one came to ask why she was standing there alone. No one knew why, among a wardrobe full of newer dresses, she had chosen to wear this old one on this particular day. No one knew what that dress was keeping safe. And that was the very thing that all of them, no matter how much they laughed, would never have the right to touch. 25 years earlier, on a small street that did not even have a name on the map, a woman sat sewing late into the night. Her name was Ngozi, a seamstress, a widow, and Adeze's mother. She did not have much to leave her daughter. No money, no status, no powerful relatives to rely on. Only her skilled hands and an ancient hand-sewing technique passed down through generations. She had learned it from her grandmother, who had learned it from the generation before her. The hand-quilted stitches were so refined that even someone who had worked in the trade for 30 years would stop and stare. That technique could not be learned in a month. It could not be bought with money. It could only be passed from one pair of hands to another through years and years of sitting together beneath the glow of oil lamps. And she never had the chance to pass it on to Adeze because illness came too quickly. During the last 3 nights before her death, she did not sleep. She sat and sewed continuously to finish her final dress. Each stitch was slower than before, yet still even, still straight, still beautiful in a way that seemed almost impossible. On the morning of the 3rd day, she called Adeze to her side and placed the dress into her daughter's hands. Her voice still carried enough strength to speak every word clearly. As you grow older, there will be days when people try to make you forget who you are. Wear this dress on those days. Adeze was 12 years old then. She did not fully understand what her mother meant. She simply nodded and held the dress tightly in her hands. 2 days later, Ngozi died. Adeze placed the dress at the bottom of a chest and kept it there. She never wore it. She never lent it to anyone. She never allowed anyone to touch it. Not out of superstition, but because she was waiting for the exact day her mother had spoken of. Adeze grew up and married into the Obiora family, a wealthy, respected family that valued appearances down to the smallest detail. From the first day she entered that household, she understood exactly where she stood in their eyes. Mrs. Obiora never scolded Adeze directly. She was smarter than that. She merely made subtle remarks about her daughter-in-law's background in front of guests. She smiled at exactly the right moments in exactly the right way, so that outsiders understood without her ever having to say anything outright. Every contribution Adeze made was treated as something she was simply expected to do. Every silence was interpreted as proof that she had nothing worth saying. Chisom, her sister-in-law, learned from her mother the looks, the comments, the delivery. It came as naturally to her as breathing. This family did not hate Adeze. That would have been easier. They simply did not see her. And sometimes being unseen hurts more than being hated. Emeka, her husband, was not a bad man. He was kind, he worked hard, he loved his wife in the only way he knew how. But he feared his mother more than he understood his wife. Whenever Adeze was hurt, he chose silence to keep the peace. He called it wisdom. Adeze called it a loneliness without a name. The kind of loneliness that does not happen when you are alone, but when you are standing beside the person who is supposed to protect you. 1 week before the wedding, Mrs. Obiora sat in the living room with a stack of envelopes in her hand and called each family member forward to receive money for new clothes to wear to the ceremony. Chisom received hers first, of course. She was the bride, and she received the most. Then came the cousins, then more distant relatives, one envelope after another. Mrs. Obiora handed them out with the smile of a generous woman in the eyes of society. Adeze stood near the doorway and waited. She waited until Mrs. Obiora put her wallet away, stood up and walked into the kitchen without looking in her direction even once. There was no envelope for Adeze. It was not because Mrs. Obiora had forgotten. Mrs. Obiora never forgot the things she intended to do. It was a decision carried out through silence, the most refined weapon that woman knew how to use. Adeze waited until evening, when the house had grown quiet, before approaching her mother-in-law. She asked gently. There was not a trace of complaint or accusation in her voice. She asked as simply as someone asking about tomorrow's weather. Mrs. Obiora looked at her for a moment, and then replied in a voice so sweet that its bitterness only appeared afterward. A small gift still carries goodwill. People will understand. That was all. No further explanation, no apology, not a single sentence Adeze could pick apart or argue against. That was Mrs. Obiora's art, saying enough to end a conversation, but never enough to be challenged. Adeze nodded, returned to her room and closed the door. She did not cry. She did not call anyone to complain. She did not lie on her bed staring at the ceiling. She opened her wardrobe, took out her mother's dress, laid it on the bed and sat beside it. In the darkness of the room, she placed her hand on each old seam and gently traced it from beginning to end, slowly, carefully. Not because she was sad, not because she was angry, but because she knew. After 25 years of keeping the dress at the bottom of that chest, she knew the day her mother had spoken of had finally arrived. That night she slept normally. No tossing and turning, no dreams. The next morning, she woke up, put on the dress, looked at herself in the mirror for a moment, and walked out of the room. When Adeze appeared at the wedding in the faded ivory dress, her in-laws exchanged the kind of looks people give when they see something that does not fit the picture they are trying to create. The whispers began at an inner table where several relatives sat close enough to talk without lowering their voices. "Look at Mrs. Obiora's daughter-in-law. What is she wearing?" "Well, she comes from a poor family. What can you expect?" "Showing up at a wedding dressed like she's going to the market. How strange." The whispers spread from table to table like water creeping across a floor. Slowly but surely, impossible to stop. Mrs.
Obiora heard them. She looked at her daughter-in-law. She looked at the eyes turning towards her daughter-in-law. She looked at the smiles hidden behind guest sleeves, and she could not hold herself back. Not because she was angry, but because she felt her reputation being dragged down at her daughter's wedding in front of all the people she wanted to impress. She walked straight towards Adeze, raising her voice just enough for 3 nearby tables to hear. "Couldn't this family afford a new dress for you? Is that why you came here wearing something so worn out? Do you know this is my daughter's wedding? Do you know guests have come all the way from Lagos and Abuja? They look at this family and they look at you." Each sentence was a strike. No knife was needed, only the voice and gaze of a woman who had practiced this art for decades. Chisom stood nearby, looked her sister-in-law up and down, then turned toward her friends with a faint smile. "My sister-in-law looks wonderful, truly vintage."
Laughter broke out, not loud, but loud enough to be clearly heard in the silence that had settled over the moment. An aunt at a nearby table leaned toward the person beside her. "What kind of daughter-in-law is this? Is she doing it on purpose?" The man across from her shook his head. "Just leave her alone." But his wife did not leave her alone. She kept watching Adeze with the look of someone who had just found a story to tell after the party. Emeka stood 5 steps away. He heard everything. He looked at his wife once and then lowered his eyes to his phone. He said nothing. He did not walk over. That lowering of his head was enough of an answer to explain exactly how their 8 years of marriage had unfolded. Adeze stood tall in the middle of all of it. She did not blush. She did not lower her head. She did not say a single word. She simply placed her hand on her mother's stitching and gently brushed it once, as though reminding herself of something, then quietly stepped away to the back corner of the courtyard. No one followed her. No one asked how she was. She stood alone beneath an old palm tree, looking out across the quiet yard, her hand still resting lightly on her sleeve. Inside, the music continued, the laughter continued, and the story of Mrs. Obiora's daughter-in-law and her old dress kept spreading from table to table like a seasoning no one had ordered, yet somehow appeared at every feast. That was when Mrs. Lynn saw her.
She was seated at the last table, a guest who had come through a social invitation from an acquaintance, someone who did not truly belong at this wedding in any meaningful way. For more than 20 years, Mrs. Lynn had traveled from place to place, searching for traditional hand-sewing techniques that had nearly vanished, stitches, knots, and methods of working with fabric that earlier generations had left behind and later generations no longer knew how to create. She had visited dozens of villages. She had met hundreds of elderly artisans. She had turned the pages of forgotten books in libraries no one visited anymore. And throughout those 20 years, there was one technique she had never seen in real life. She had only seen it in a few black and white photographs taken decades ago. She had only read descriptions of it in a handful of rare books whose original copies no longer existed. An ancient style of hand quilting, so intricate that machines could not imitate it. Beautiful in a way only human hands could create. She had spent 20 years searching for someone capable of that technique and had never found anyone. Until she sat at the last table of a wedding where she did not truly belong and saw a woman standing alone in the corner of the courtyard, wearing the old dress the entire room had just laughed at. She set down her glass. She stood up. She walked toward the corner of the courtyard. Her hand gently touched the stitching on Adeze's sleeve. Then it stopped. It trembled slightly.
not from cold, but because she had just touched the very thing she had spent 20 years searching for, never imagining she would find it here, on an afternoon like this, worn by a woman the entire room had mocked because of the dress she was wearing. Mrs. Lynn approached Adeze, not hurriedly, not dramatically. She moved with the pace of someone who had spent a lifetime observing more than speaking. She stood beside her for a moment without saying anything, her eyes fixed on the stitching along the sleeve as though reading a book she had been searching for a very long time. Adeze looked at the unfamiliar woman standing beside her. She was not surprised. She did not ask any questions. She simply waited. Only then did Mrs. Lynn lift her head and speak in a gentle voice, as though asking something she was not sure she had the right to ask. "This dress, does it belong to you?" Adeze nodded. "Yes, my mother left it to me." Mrs. Lynn looked at her for a moment and then asked again, her voice still soft, though now carrying something more urgent. "Did your mother make this dress herself? Is she still alive?" Adeze shook her head. "My mother passed away a long time ago. This was the last dress she made before she died." Mrs. Lynn fell silent. Not the silence of someone who did not know what to say. The silence of someone who had just heard a sentence whose full meaning would take time to absorb. Then she asked, speaking more slowly, more clearly, "Could you tell me about your mother? Where did she learn sewing? How long did she practice this craft?" Adeze studied Mrs. Lynn for a moment, not suspiciously, only long enough to understand who was asking and why. Then she began to tell her story. Her voice was calm, as though discussing the weather. She did not speak to impress. She did not speak to gain sympathy. She spoke simply because she had been asked, and because the question sounded sincere. Her mother's name was Ngozi, a seamstress on a small street that did not even appear on a map. She had learned her technique from her grandmother, who had learned it from the generation before her. She never attended any formal school. She had no certificates, no grand tailor shop, only a small table beside a window and hands that worked from morning until night. She died when Adeze was 12 years old, and this dress was the last thing she managed to create before she left. For 3 nights in a row, she sat sewing while her body no longer had the strength for it, simply to finish it for her daughter. Mrs. Lynn listened without missing a single word. Her hand rested lightly on the stitching of Adeze's sleeve. Her index finger followed each stitch with the care of someone touching something fragile. Then she looked up. Her eyes were red with emotion. "Your mother's name was Ngozi. What was her family name?" Adeze told her. Mrs. Lynn placed a hand against her chest and closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them again, there was something in them that looked both like relief and pain. The expression of someone who had finally found what they had searched for a very long time, but found it too late for the person who most deserved to hear it. "We've been searching for her for 20 years. Mrs. Lynn's voice dropped lower, not intentionally, but because the sentence carried more weight than she expected when spoken aloud. "This quilting technique, the stitching running along this sleeve, we've only seen it in a few black and white photographs from decades ago, and in 2 pages of an old book whose original copy no longer exists. We've travelled through dozens of villages, we've met hundreds of seamstresses. No one could do it. The only person we ever heard associated with this technique was a woman who disappeared from the artisan community many years ago. No one knew where she went. No one knew whether she was still alive." She paused and looked at Adeze. "Now I know." Adeze stood quietly listening. Her expression barely changed. Only her eyes drifted down to the dress for a moment before rising again. She said nothing. There was nothing she needed to say. "Mrs." Lynn turned and looked toward the reception tables, where the whispers about the old dress had not yet completely faded. Where Mrs. Obiora still stood, wearing the smile of a woman accustomed to being admired. Where Chisom still stood beside the groom, in the red and gold embroidered gown commissioned 3 months earlier. Mrs. Lynn looked in that direction for a moment. Then she walked forward, not away, toward the very people who had laughed. When she spoke, her voice was not loud, not dramatic. She had no intention of creating a spectacle. She simply spoke the truth the same way she had spoken truth throughout 20 years of research. Clearly, loud enough to be heard, without adding anything and without taking anything away. The dress that woman is wearing is the rarest surviving piece of traditional craftsmanship I have ever seen in real life.
And the woman who made it was one of the most talented artisans this craft community has ever produced, even though no one in this room knew it until today. The reception area fell silent in the way only truth can create silence. Not because the atmosphere was tense, but because no one knew how to react to what had just been said. Mrs. Obiora froze. The smile on her face did not disappear immediately. It slowly melted away, piece by piece, like wax meeting flame. Slowly, but impossibly to stop. At some point, Chisom's smile had vanished as well. She stood beside the groom with the expression of someone who had stepped outside and suddenly found herself caught in the rain without an umbrella. The aunt who had earlier whispered, "What kind of daughter-in-law is this?" was now staring into the glass in her hand as though it had suddenly become fascinating. The middle-aged woman who had said, "Well, she comes from a poor family. What can you expect?" was now looking away with the speed of someone wishing she could become invisible. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. The story they had been telling about Mrs. Obiora's daughter-in-law and her old dress was still sitting in their mouths, but suddenly it tasted completely different from when they first spoke it. Adeze did not look toward them. She did not turn around to see her mother-in-law's face. She did not search for Chisom's eyes. She did none of the things people usually do when they have just been proven right in front of a crowd. She looked down at the dress. Her hand gently touched her mother's stitching and traced it once more, slowly, as though speaking a sentence only the two of them could understand. As though saying, "I know now, Mother. I know which day you meant." Emeka stood in the corner of the room and watched the entire scene unfold. He watched Mrs. Lin walk away. He watched his mother stand frozen. He watched Chisom lose her smile. Then he looked at his wife. Not the quick 2-second glance before lowering his head to his phone, the way he had done for the past 8 years. He truly looked at her. For the first time in a very long time, he looked at the woman standing alone in the corner of the courtyard, her hand resting lightly on her sleeve, her eyes lowered to the dress, calm to a degree he could not understand. How could someone who had just stood in the middle of all that remain so calm? And in that moment, for the first time, he understood something. She did not need him to protect her. She did not need him to stand between her and anyone else. She did not need any of the things he had failed to do for 8 years. She had never needed him to tell her who she was. She had known who she was long before she met him. Long before she entered this house. Long before anything connected to the Obiora family. She had known since the night she was 12 years old, sitting beside her dying mother's bed with that dress in her hands. What he felt at that moment did not have an exact name. It was part shame, part regret, part the feeling that comes when a person realizes they have missed something important and no longer knows whether there is still time to make it right. A few weeks after the wedding, life in the Obiora household returned to normal, at least on the surface. Meals were still served on time, the house remained spotless, everything appeared exactly as it had before. But something had changed in the way Mrs. Obiora looked at Adeze. Not because she had become kinder, not because her nature had changed. There was simply something in her gaze that had not been there before. Caution. Then, one afternoon, she knocked on Adeze's door. She entered with a smile entirely different from her usual one, sweeter, softer, the kind of smile Mrs. Obiora only wore when she wanted something. She sat down. She did not rush to the point. She asked about Adeze's health. She asked about the household. She exchanged a few meaningless pleasantries before finally arriving at what she truly wanted to say. She wanted Adeze to connect her with Mrs. Lin. She had heard that Mrs. Lin was working on a heritage restoration project, and if possible, she wanted a dress similar to that one recreated and displayed in the house as a family heirloom. She used those exact words.
Her tone was so natural that it sounded as though the idea had always been hers, rather than something she had only considered after hearing Mrs. Lynde speak in front of all those guests. Adeze listened to everything. She did not interrupt. She did not frown. Nothing in her expression revealed what she was thinking. She simply listened calmly until Mrs. Obiora finished speaking and waited for an answer. Adeze stood up. She went into the kitchen. She boiled water. She made tea. Then she carried a cup back and placed it in front of her mother-in-law, with the same careful gestures she had performed thousands of times over the previous 8 years. Neither hurried nor slow, nothing missing, nothing extra. Then she pulled out a chair and sat down opposite her. She placed her hands on the table and looked directly at her mother-in-law. It was the first time she had done so in a way that no one could call disrespectful, yet no one could call submissive. When she spoke, her voice was remarkably calm. No trembling, no bitterness, nothing except the clarity of someone who had thought very carefully about what she was about to say. Mother, that dress was not made to be displayed. My mother made it so I would remember who I am on the days when people try to make me forget. I don't think this family needs another one. Not another word. No further explanation. She did not list everything Mrs. Obiora had done during those 8 years. She did not mention the wedding. She did not say a single thing meant to shame her or force her to defend herself. Just one sentence. Enough. Exactly enough. Then she stood, returned to her desk, and continued the work that she had been doing before the knock on the door, as though the conversation had completely ended and required nothing more. Mrs. Obiora sat there alone, with the still warm cup of tea in her hands. She did not know what else to say. There was nothing to criticize, no argument to make, no opening through which she could insert another word without exposing something she would rather keep hidden. She sat there for a while before eventually standing and leaving. She crossed the room in the silence of someone who had just lost a game they never realized they were playing. That night, after the guests had gone home, after the music had stopped, after the rows of white-covered tables had been cleared away, after the house had returned to its familiar silence, Emeka knocked on his wife's door. Adeze was sitting at her desk. Her hair was down. The light makeup she had worn since morning was gone. Her mother's dress had been folded carefully and placed on top of the cabinet beside her bed. She had not returned it to the bottom of the chest. It simply rested there, as though she had not yet decided what to do with it next. Emeka stepped inside and stood in the middle of the room. His hands seemed to have nowhere to go. He was a man accustomed to working with his hands, but not accustomed to standing in a room with empty hands and no idea where to begin. He stood there for a moment before finally speaking. His voice was neither loud nor soft. It was simply the voice of a man trying to tell the truth after many years of choosing not to. I'm sorry. Adeze did not turn around immediately. She stared ahead for a moment, as though checking whether she had heard correctly, or whether this was merely a sentence she had imagined so many times that she could no longer tell imagination from reality. Then she turned and looked at him. Not with the gaze of someone waiting for an apology, not with the gaze of someone deciding whether to forgive, just the calm gaze of someone truly looking at another person and trying to understand where that person stood. Emeka continued, as though if he stopped speaking he might never find the courage again. Today I stood there and did nothing. Not for the first time, I know that. I kept telling myself I was keeping the peace, that I cared about both sides, that I didn't want to make things more complicated. But today I watched you standing there alone, and I realized there is no such thing as keeping the peace when the person you love is being hurt right in front of you. He paused. I'm sorry for leaving you alone for so long. Adeze looked at him for another moment. Then she spoke. There was no blame in her voice, no bitterness accumulated over 8 years, only the clarity of someone who had thought carefully about what she wanted to say and knew exactly what it was. I don't need your apology. I just need you to see me, even if it starts now. Nothing more, nothing less. No list of his mistakes, no demands about how he should change, no conditions attached. Just one sentence. Enough. Exactly enough. spoken in the voice of someone who needed nothing beyond what she had just said. Emeka listened to those words and felt them weigh more heavily than any accusation he had ever prepared himself to hear. Because accusations can be defended against, explained away, softened. But her words left no room for any defense. They left only one question he would have to answer for himself. From now on, would he truly see her? That night he could not sleep, not because of guilt, not because of worry, but because he was thinking, truly thinking, for the first time in a very long while, about the woman sleeping in the room beside him. She had lived in this house for 8 years. She had cooked the meals, cleaned the floors, endured his mother's remarks, endured his silence. And throughout all those years, she had never collapsed in the way people collapse when they have nothing left to hold on to. Because she had always had something. And that something was not him, not this house, not the approval of anyone in this family. What she held on to was the stitching on the sleeve, sewn by the mother she had lost at 12 years old, and the words that woman had spoken during the final 3 nights of her life.
He had lived beside Adeze for 8 years without knowing that. And the question that kept him awake that entire night was not what he needed to do to repair the past. It was what kind of man he needed to become in order to deserve the woman sleeping in the room next door from this day forward. There are people who spend their entire lives being laughed at for the things they carry. No one asks why they keep them. No one is patient enough to stop and understand that sometimes the oldest, most faded, most unfashionable things are protecting the most valuable things a person can possess. Not money, not status, but the memory of someone who loved them before the world taught them to doubt themselves. A reminder of who they are on the days others try to make them forget. Mrs. Obiora and Chisom looked at that dress and saw poverty. The guests looked at that dress and saw something that did not belong at a grand wedding. Emeka looked at that dress and chose not to look.
But Ngozi, the woman who spent the final 3 nights of her life sewing with trembling hands that still remained steady, straight, and beautiful, knew exactly what that dress was and what it would become. She did not make it to be admired. She made it so her daughter would have something to hold on to on the days when no one stood beside her. And of all the things a mother can leave behind, that was the most enduring. The thing no one could take away. The thing that would not fade with time, but only grow deeper each time someone tried to erase it. And there are women like Adeze, women who do not need the world to tell them who they are, who do not need the crowd's approval, who do not need a husband to defend them, who do not need a mother-in-law to change, who do not need anyone to do anything in order to know their own worth. Because long ago, on the night they sat beside their mother's bed at 12 years old and received a dress into their hands, they already knew. They were only waiting for the right day, the right moment, the right morning when they would open the wardrobe and know it was time to wear it. Not to prove anything to anyone, not to win, not to lose, only to remember who they are, to remember where they came from, to remember that someone loved them enough to spend the final 3 nights of her life sewing, simply to make sure her daughter would have this one thing in her hands after she was gone.
The dress was still there, the fabric was still faded, the hem below the knees was still slightly worn, but the stitching remained even, straight, and beautiful in a way that 20 years had not been able to erase. And perhaps that was what Ngozi had known all along, before she chose to leave her daughter. Not money, not a house, not anything that could be picked up and given a price, but only an old dress and a single piece of advice. A piece of advice her daughter carried with her for 25 years, until the day she needed it most, when she put on that dress and stood tall in the middle of everything that tried to make her bow her head. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Every comment you leave is the encouragement that helps us continue telling these stories.